Welcome to the deep dive. You know how this works. You give us the sources, and we dig in and we try to get all the good stuff out of it.
Right.
This time, we're tackling a question that you've probably thought about at some point as you're looking at that holiday bird.
Yeah.
Why do we eat turkey at Christmas?
It does seem so ingrained in the tradition, right?
What?
But as your sources show, articles in English and French spanning back centuries,
Yeah.
the story of the Christmas turkey is more complicated than you might think.
Exactly, and it's a journey that actually starts pretty far from those snowy streets of like London or Paris. We're heading to Mexico.
That's right. While we picture turkeys walking around on English farms, they're actually native to North America, and the story goes that those conquistadors returning from Mexico in the 16th century
Oh, wow.
brought these strange birds back with them.
Okay, so we're talking about a time when the Americas were like just being discovered by Europeans.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty wild beginning for our Christmas tradition.
And it gets even more interesting. It's not like the conquistadors just found these wild turkeys and decided to bring them back home.
Right.
The indigenous peoples of Mexico had already domesticated turkeys way before Europeans even got there. They were already part of their cuisine and agriculture.
So right off the bat, we're already busting the myth that this is like a completely European tradition.
Yeah,
It comes from indigenous American cultures.
absolutely. And that exchange across continents continued. One of your sources talks about the Norfolk black turkey, which is a breed developed in England,
Right.
and it's believed to be descended from those early Mexican turkeys, and then it was brought back to the Americas over 200 years later.
Talk about going full circle. But I have to say, one detail really made me laugh.
Yeah.
It seems those first turkeys coming into England didn't exactly make like a grand entrance.
Yeah, you're talking about the account from William Strickland,
Yeah,
who
yeah.
brought back 6 turkeys in 1526. And he did not like the way they looked. He even called their appearance idiotic.
Oh, my goodness.
And he compared those fleshy bits on their beaks to red socks.
So not exactly the majestic holiday symbol we think of today.
Right.
He even sold those first turkeys for like practically nothing.
Oh, yeah.
But wait a minute. Another source says that turkeys were in Spain even earlier, like 1511.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the interesting part. We have this mention of a royal letter requesting a ship to bring back 10 peacocks. But when you read the description, it sounds more like turkeys. So the exact timeline and the route that they took to get to Europe is still a little bit of a mystery.
A delicious mystery.
Yeah.
But mystery or not, it seems that turkeys quickly became a favorite among the elite. We have a record of them in France as early as 1534, just hanging out in the royal park.
And that's important to remember. For a long time, turkey was a luxury,
Yeah.
a real status symbol. Imagine having this exotic, expensive bird at your table. It was a way to show off your wealth and like your sophistication.
It's almost the opposite of how we think of turkey today.
Right.
That's something that everybody can afford. But that didn't happen right away.
No, it took centuries. It wasn't until the 1920s that most people could even get turkeys. And that was because of changes in farming practices like mechanization, which made them cheaper to produce.
So we've got those economic factors. But what about cultural influences? Didn't writers like Charles Dickens have something to do with making turkey popular?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Dickens was a big fan of turkey, and his writing helped make that connection between turkey and Christmas stronger. Think about that famous scene in A Christmas Carol when Scrooge buys the Cratchit family a turkey. Pure holiday magic.
Right. And, King Edward VII's love for turkey didn't hurt either.
No.
But this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Everybody says that turkey is like the classic Christmas dish. But the statistics today tell a bit of a different story.
Yeah, that's what makes this so interesting, challenging these assumptions we have about tradition.
Because it turns out only 54% of Britons are actually eating turkey on Christmas these days. That means that almost half the population is choosing something else.
Exactly. And it's different in different regions, too. Turkey's more popular outside of London, for example. Makes you wonder what those other options are and what that says about how traditions are changing.
Well, before we jump to those modern options,
Yeah.
I'm curious, what came before turkey? What were people eating at Christmas in England before this bird from across the ocean took over?
Get ready for some real historical food facts.
Okay.
One of your sources talks about a very dramatic dish. A boar's head with a festive song.
A whole boar's head.
It
That's a statement. I can only imagine trying to cook that thing.
must have been quite a sight and quite a challenge for the cook.
Right. Okay. So we got this main attraction. What else was on the menu back then?
Well, there was pottage, which is a hearty stew served in hollowed out bread. Talk about resourceful.
I love it. Not a lot of dishes to wash either.
Yeah, exactly.
But wait, there's more, right? You mentioned something called a Christmas pie.
Oh, yeah.
That sounded pretty intense.
Yeah, this wasn't your average pie. Picture a pigeon stuffed inside a chicken, stuffed inside a turkey, stuffed inside a goose.
Whoa, hold on. How many birds are we talking about here? It's like a food version of those Russian nesting dolls.
Exactly. Really shows off their cooking skills, and it's pretty different from the single turkey we usually see today, don't you think?
It makes you wonder how we went from this multiple bird feast to just turkey. Clearly, it's not just about taste.
Right.
There's a whole cultural shift happening here.
It's a great example of how money, technology, even the influence of famous authors can affect what we eat.
Speaking of changing taste, we can't forget about the vegan option mentioned in one of the sources.
Right.
It's a recipe for sitin façon dinde farci. It's like a plant-based version of the classic roast.
It's an interesting look at how people are changing traditions to fit their diets and what they believe in.
And it's not just about being vegan or vegetarian. This source really gets into the problems of factory farming.
Yeah.
And the effects that meat production has on the environment.
They talk about those cramped conditions and how much we depend on antibiotics and the overall impact on how animals are treated.
Yeah, it's something to think about as we're enjoying those holiday meals.
Definitely.
And then they talk about how meat production affects the environment, especially when it comes to resources and those greenhouse gas emissions.
It's complicated, and it's becoming more important as we face climate change. It's not just about veganism or vegetarianism. It's about a growing movement to eat less meat in general.
Exactly. I'm hearing more and more about being a flexitarian or a reducitarian.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much about strict rules, but about making good choices about what you eat.
Yeah, it's about knowing how what you eat affects the planet and your own health, and I think that's a good thing.
I agree. It's not about telling people what to do, but about encouraging everyone to think more carefully about what they eat.
Especially during the holidays when we tend to overdo it and focus on traditions. It's a good time to stop and think about where our food comes from.
I think that's a great point. It's not about taking away from anyone, but about finding a good balance that fits your values.
And, having more plant-based dishes at Christmas doesn't have to mean giving up on flavor or fun.
Right. The seitan façon dinde farci proves that. They even make it look like a turkey with a heart surprise in the middle. Talk about dedication.
It's a fun way to keep the tradition while offering something delicious and compassionate, and it opens up so many possibilities in the kitchen.
You could have a table full of roasted root vegetables glazed with maple syrup, or a creamy mushroom soup with crunchy croutons, or a lentil loaf full of herbs and spices.
Don't forget about dessert. Gingerbread cookies, fruitcake, mince pies. Lots of holiday favorites are already plant-based. You can have a delicious festive meal without any animal products.
It's making me rethink my own Christmas menu. But before we get too into those modern options,
Right.
let's go back to the fact that statistically, turkey isn't really the king of the Christmas dinner table.
That's true. While it's a big part of what we think of as Christmas, only about half of Britons choose turkey for their dinner.
And as we've been talking about, there are so many delicious alternatives, both traditional and modern. Chicken and beef are popular, and some people are even going back to goose, which was a favorite before turkey took over.
It makes you think if those changing preferences are a sign of what's to come. Is the turkey's reign actually in danger?
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
But one thing that really struck me as we were looking through these sources is the history. We tend to think of the Christmas turkey as something that's always been around. But it wasn't even an option in Europe just a few centuries ago.
It's a good reminder that what we see as traditional is often something pretty new.
Before turkey came along, Christmas dinner in England looked completely different. We talked about the boar's head, that elaborate Christmas pie, even the simple pottage in those bread bowls.
Those dishes show us a way of cooking that's almost hard to imagine today. What do you think caused such a big change in Christmas food?
I think the cost had a lot to do with it. As turkey became more available and cheaper,
Yeah.
it probably made more sense for a big holiday meal, especially compared to those multi-bird feasts.
Makes sense. Plus, those advancements in farming transportation and how we keep food cold would have made it easier to raise, transport, and store turkeys.
Right.
So they would have been a better option for a lot of people.
And let's not forget about the power of trends and those people who influence what's popular. We talked about Dickens and King Edward VII. Their love for turkey definitely helped to make it more popular and solidify its place in that Christmas tradition.
It reminds you that even traditions that seem really old are always changing and being shaped by a lot of things, from money to popular culture.
It really makes you appreciate how dynamic tradition actually is.
Yeah.
But speaking of change, we can't wrap up this deep dive without looking ahead. What do you think Christmas dinner will look like in the future?
Ah, yes. The future of food. Should we get into some culinary predictions?
That, uh,
So before the break, we were talking about those ethical concerns with how meat is produced, and this recipe for seitan façon dinde farci really caught my attention.
it's a pretty clever take on a tradition, isn't it? Using seitan, which is made from wheat gluten, to make it look and feel like a roast turkey.
And this blogger didn't just pick seitan randomly. They explained that it was important to find something that had that same kind of texture and could be shaped and stuffed.
Right, like the traditional bird.
It shows how creative and resourceful people are when looking for those plant-based options. They're not just rejecting tradition, but finding ways to change it so it fits their values.
And speaking of values, this source really dives into the reasons they choose not to eat turkey. And they bring up some important points about factory farming.
They talk about the conditions those animals are kept in,
Right.
how much they rely on antibiotics, and just the overall impact on how the animals are treated, things we don't really like to think about when we're having our holiday meals.
Definitely food for thought, pun intended. And they go on to talk about how meat production affects the environment, especially when it comes to things like how we use resources and those greenhouse gases.
It's a complex issue, and it's becoming more and more important as we deal with climate change. It's not just about veganism or vegetarianism. It's a growing movement to just eat less meat overall.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said before, I'm hearing terms like flexitarian and reducitarian more often. It's not really about strict rules. It's more about making smart choices about what we eat.
It's about being aware of how our food choices affect the planet and our own health. And I think that's a good thing, don't you?
Definitely. Like you said before, it's not about judging what other people choose to eat. It's about encouraging everyone to just think more carefully about what they put on their plates.
Especially during the holidays when we tend to kind of overdo it and really get into those traditions, it's a good time to slow down and think about where our food comes from.
I think that's a great point. It's not about depriving ourselves. It's about finding a balance that works with what we believe in.
And, adding in more plant-based dishes at Christmas doesn't have to mean that the food's not going to taste good or that it's not going to be festive.
Right? Like the seitan façon dinde farci shows us they even make it look like a turkey with a heart surprise in the middle.
Yeah.
Talk about dedication.
It's a fun way to still honor that traditional dish while also offering something delicious and compassionate. And it opens up all sorts of possibilities for what you can make.
Imagine a table full of roasted root vegetables with maple syrup, or a creamy mushroom soup with those crunchy croutons, or a lentil loaf packed with herbs and spices.
And don't forget dessert. Gingerbread cookies, fruitcake, mince pie pies. There are so many holiday classics that are already plant-based. You can have a super indulgent and festive meal without using any animal products.
It's making me rethink my own Christmas menu.
That
But before we get too carried away with what we eat today, let's go back to the fact that, statistically speaking, turkey isn't actually the most popular thing on the Christmas dinner table.
That's true. While it seems like it's a big part of Christmas, only about half of Britons actually choose turkey for their dinner.
And like we've been talking about, there are a ton of delicious alternatives, both traditional and modern. Chicken and beef are popular choices, and some people are even going back to goose, which was a favorite before turkey became the big thing.
It makes you wonder if these changes in what people want to eat mean something for the future. Could turkey be losing its place?
It's a fascinating thought. But one thing that really hit me as we were looking through these sources was the history. We tend to think of Christmas turkey as this tradition that's been around forever. But it wasn't even something people ate in Europe just a few centuries ago.
It's a good reminder that what we think of as traditional is often something that came about fairly recently.
Before turkey came along, Christmas dinner in England looked completely different. We talked about the boar's head, that crazy Christmas pie, and even the simple pottage in those bread bowls.
Those dishes give us a peek into a way of cooking that's almost hard to imagine today. What do you think made Christmas food change so much?
I think money probably played a big part. As turkey became easier to find and more affordable, it just made more sense for a big holiday meal, especially compared to those feasts with multiple birds.
That makes sense. And all those advancements in farming and transportation and how we keep food cold would have made it easier to raise, move around, and store turkeys. So they would have been a much better option for most people.
Right. And we can't forget about how trends and influential people affect things. We talk about Dickens and King Edward VII. Their love for turkey really helped to make it popular and cement its place in that Christmas tradition.
It shows you that even traditions that seem really old are always being shaped and reshaped by all sorts of things, from the economy to what's popular in culture.
It really makes you see how dynamic tradition is. But speaking of change, we can't finish this deep dive without looking ahead. What do you think Christmas dinner will be like in the future?
Ah, yes, the future of food. Want to try to predict what people will eat.
Let's do it. So we're back and ready to tackle that big question. What will Christmas dinner look like in the future? After our deep dive into the Christmas turkey, I'm not so sure anything is really set in stone when it comes to tradition.
It's a bit like trying to see the future of food, isn't it? Will those familiar sights and smells of Christmas dinner stick around, or will things change completely?
Well, if the turkey's journey from Mexico to the center of the Christmas table tells us anything, it's that change is always part of tradition.
Exactly. We've gone from boar's heads to those multi-bird pies to the reign of the turkey. And even that's being challenged now with all these plant-based options and alternative proteins.
So what will shape the next chapter in this food story? What do you think? Will it be all about sustainability?
I think that'll be a big part of it. As people become more aware of how our food choices affect the environment,
Yeah.
we'll probably see a lot more plant-based dishes and meat that's produced in a way that's good for the planet.
It makes sense. We've already talked about those ethical questions about factory farming and how meat production affects the environment.
Imagine a Christmas dinner where the main dish is a platter of roasted root vegetables all seasoned up, or a lentil loaf with all sorts of savory flavors.
Okay, I'm with you on those, both delicious and sustainable. But one of the sources mentioned something that really surprised me. Lab-grown turkey. Is that really going to happen?
It might be closer than you think. It might sound like something out of science fiction, but the technology to grow meat in a lab is getting better really fast.
I have to say, I'm still getting used to the idea of lab-grown meat.
Yeah,
But it is interesting, especially if it can help with those environmental concerns we were talking about.
and think about the possibilities. We could have meat that doesn't need antibiotics or hormones produced in a controlled way that doesn't create a lot of waste and doesn't use up a lot of resources.
When you put it like that, it's pretty amazing. But besides lab-grown meat, I imagine technology is going to affect Christmas dinner in other ways too.
Definitely. Things like smart ovens that figure out cooking times and temperatures for you.
Oh yeah,
Personalized recipes that AI creates based on what you like and what you need to eat. Even virtual reality experiences that take you to where your food comes from.
wow, you've really thought about this. VR for Christmas dinner.
Hmm.
That's taking things to a whole new level.
Yeah.
But I do like the idea of technology helping us feel more connected to our food.
And don't forget about social media. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok could really influence what we eat at Christmas. Viral videos showing up new dishes and cool cooking techniques.
You're right. Imagine some new way to make Brussels sprouts or a special spice blend becoming like the must-have dish, all because of a trending hashtag.
It's really interesting how all these different things, sustainability technology and social media, will probably all come together to shape what we eat during the holidays.
It's like a mix of everything new and old all simmering together. But no matter how much Christmas dinner changes, I think some things will always stay the same.
Absolutely. Things like spending time with loved ones, sharing a meal, and making memories that will last forever will always be the most important part of the celebration.
You're right. It's about connection, gratitude, and celebration. Those are values that go beyond any specific menu or food trend.
Exactly. Whether it's a classic roast turkey, a delicious plant-based meal, or even something made in a lab, the heart of Christmas dinner will always be there. It shows you how powerful food is at bringing people together.
Well said. I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of the Christmas turkey. It's been quite a journey.
We've explored its surprising beginnings, followed its path from a symbol of wealth to a holiday tradition, and even imagined what Christmas dinner might look like in the future.
And along the way, we've learned some amazing things about how history, culture, economics, and even technology shape what we eat and those traditions around food.
So as you gather with your loved ones this Christmas, take a moment to think about the story behind the food you're sharing.
Whether you're enjoying a traditional roast turkey, trying a plant-based dish, or maybe even getting a taste of that lab-grown future, remember that every dish tells a story of human creativity, cultural exchange, and our desire to connect through food.
And most importantly, enjoy the moment, the company, and the shared experience of a meal that brings everyone together.
Well said. From all of us here at The Deep Dive, we wish you a very happy holiday season.
And a delicious new year.